Welcome to It's a New Day. My name is James Young. And today my guest is?
Malik Evans, President of the Board of Education.
And you're from Rochester. Well, I know that you're from Rochester. We know your father. Your father's very well known here. But please tell us a little bit about growing up here in Rochester.
Well, Rochester, I'm from Rochester, born and raised, born in Highland Hospital, went to elementary school right across the street, graduated from Wilson Magnet High School, went on to the University of Rochester, and then went into banking, vice president at a local bank here, and also, now president of the board, ran for the board in 2003, becoming the youngest person ever elected to the board, and took the term of office in 2004, and became president in 2008, and been serving as president since 2008 of the Board of Education.
Would you explain to us, what is it that the Board of Education actually does?
Well, it's a great question. The Board of Education is responsible for everything that's related to the school district. So we are responsible for hiring the superintendent and supervising the superintendent. We are responsible for creating board policies and all of the policies that are there at the district. We are responsible for signing off on every single person that is hired in the district. So you can't hire from a custodian to a teacher to an administrator cannot be hired unless the Board of Education agrees to it. We are also responsible for allocating all the resources that you see, so the amount of money that is spent on textbooks, the amount of money that is spent on busing, the amount of money that is spent on maintenance of buildings. We are responsible for all of those things. So just about everything in terms of how the district is run is something that the board is responsible for. Now, the board is not responsible for directly supervising individuals. The only person that we only have one employee that we are responsible for directly supervising. That's the superintendent. Then him and his team are responsible for running the day-to-day operations of the district, because the 7 members on the Board of Education have day jobs. They are career professionals, laymen, that do other things throughout their day job. Myself, my profession is that I'm a banker. There are people down on the board that are in human services. There's lawyers, there's nurses. So people on the board have professional jobs that they do during the day, and we leave the supervision to the superintendent and his team, who we hold accountable for. A little bit about the district. The district is the 3rd largest district in New York State. We have a budget of over $750 million, about 30,000 students that we see, close to 10,000 employees. So it's a very large, massive organization that the Board of Education is responsible for.
Just want to ask you a quick question. When you were saying that the board is responsible for everyone that's hired, regardless to whatever position, what about when it comes to doing business with the district? Is that a separate situation?
That's a great question. The board is responsible for deciding what vendors get to come into the district. So, for example, we vote on resolutions for our meeting for the person that's going to be responsible for doing the furnaces, the person that's going to be responsible for providing the bus service. So, for example, Regional Transit Services is our bus provider for high school kids, so the board has to vote on that. Obviously, there's a process that they have to go through. They go through bidding, and we have a department that handles all those things. But at the end, the buck stops with the Board of Education in terms of procurement and supply. The board is responsible for deciding who gets the contracts and the funds for procurement and supply.
With all the things that are going on with the district or with the board, is the board all-encompassing? Does the board answer to anyone, or do you have the ability to develop policies for yourself without being overruled?
Great answer, great question. First off, two-part question. First off, board members, as you know, are elected to serve 4 years citywide throughout the city. So we're ultimately accountable for our positions to the public. They get to vote us in. But there's an ultimate accountability. The only person that really can remove a board other than the public is the State Department of Education. So they are responsible for making all of the rules. So sometimes people will say, why don't you come up with this curriculum? Well, sometimes you can't do that. We answer to the State Department of Education, and also we now answer into, because of the federal government, No Child Left Behind, and the government has increasingly taken a very active role in public education, for better or worse. Many people say for worse. They also control many of the things and decisions that we make, including money that is spent. So a lot of the money that we spend are already dictated to us before we even get in the budget. For example, you have to spend a certain amount of money for special education students. You have to spend a certain amount of money for food service. The reimbursement rate on buildings is decided by the state. So if I decided one day I wanted to build a whole new entire school, we'd have to get state approval for that, because they only aid maybe 85 or 90% of that. So there are so many rules and regulations that are set by the state education department that the board has to follow. So I always joke with people. I say sometimes we can't make a phone call sometimes without getting it cleared by the state education department. They make a lot of decisions that govern public education in New York State.
Does any of that get in the way of doing the jobs locally?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely, because you've lost local control.
Mm-hmm.
For example, when I was in school, and even when you were in school, the school board in the district could come up with what we call a local diploma. So if we thought that we should have civics as part of graduation, we could do that. But the state now says, no, we're not doing that anymore. We have a Common Core standard. You have to pass 5 Regents exams, and that's it. You need to be able to graduate by passing these 5 Regents exams, and you no longer have the latitude or ability to come up with your own sets of curriculum. Now, you can add stuff in addition to that, but you have to make sure that these are the core things that you are going to be offering kids if they're going to be graduating from a state in New York State and be accredited. So we've seen a tremendous shift from local control of schools to now the state controlling a lot of it. People used to say, oh, it was fun being on the school board years ago. Now it is very punitive and mandated. For example, if a school isn't performing the way it should perform, the state can tell us in a heartbeat. You have 3 options. You close that school, you transform that school, or you let us, or you come in and let the state take it over. Whereas before, you might have had a little bit more latitude to do those sorts of things. But the pendulum, unfortunately, has swung so far to the extreme that school boards and school districts are increasingly frustrated with the ability and the power that they used to have that has kind of been diminished over the years. And that in turn frustrates the public because they say, oh, you should just be able to do it this way, but that is not the case because we answer, unfortunately, to a higher body, that being the state education department, even though we're elected by a citywide representative. So while it's frustrating, it represents a challenge for us, and it gives us the fuel to try to get policy changes to work with other school districts to help us to bring about change.
That also brings up a question that I was going to ask later on, but now since we're almost there, I want to ask it now, and that's pertaining to the diplomas. There's one which is the Regency diploma, which is an actual high school diploma.
Right.
And then there is something else, I believe it's a certificate of completion of something to that nature.
Right.
But that truly isn't a high school diploma.
No.
And I think that the reason why I'm mentioning that, I don't know what can be done. I don't know if this is something that the board can deal with or the district or how education deals with this here on a local level. But I did a show and I interviewed a particular woman, and she was telling me about how she thought that her son had graduated because she saw him pick up this piece of paper. But the paper that he received really wasn't a Regents diploma, a real high school diploma. It was that certificate. And he thought that he had a high school diploma. And for a year, he and his mother went around trying to find a job. He couldn't find one. And out of frustration, he ended up committing a crime. Now he's in jail. Now, I'm not suggesting
that happens to everybody.
I'm not suggesting because he didn't have a high school diploma that this is the reason why he ended up in jail. But my point is this, is that if people are somehow duped into believing that they have something that they truly don't.
Right.
How do
well,
you know,
first off, that certificate of completion, those days are over, really. Because the state says that even if a child is in special ed, you have to graduate them. And that's one of the reasons why the district's population is...
Can you explain that too? Because now, I'm glad that you brought that up, because one of the things that the general public, and myself included, we think that the schools are just throwing kids out here. They're just pumping them up. Would you please explain all that?
First off, if a child is, one of the reasons why our graduation rate is so low in Rochester is because we have not increased our graduation rate for special education students. They count in the graduation rate. So this certificate of completion, they may have been able to do this years ago, but with the new standards that have been ushered in by the state and the federal government, there is no certificate of completion. Everyone has to have passed 5 Regents exams to graduate, period. End of story. No question. If you don't pass those 5 Regents exams, you will not graduate. Period. Regardless of where you are.
And what are those 5 subjects?
I don't know them all off the top of my head, but it's basically math, science, global studies.
Okay.
There's 2 others.
Okay.
You have to be able to pass those 5 Regents exams in order to graduate. and get a diploma in New York State and for it to be recognized. And that has come up, and that has, because of that new standard, it's going to be tough for everyone to have to get to that standard. Now, I personally think that our kids are smart enough where they can pass those exams. But there's that. But there's no more certificate of completion or any of that stuff
Okay.
anymore. Those days
Very
are over,
good.
and a child has to have a Regents diploma to graduate. Period. No exception.
I know with the election of President Obama, his last term, he eliminated or he gave to the states for them to be able to make the choice if they wanted to continue with No Child Left Behind or develop their own curriculum. I know in Florida they have gotten rid of the No Child Left Behind. In Florida, it was called FCAT,
Right.
and now that's gone. And I believe that they're developing a curriculum. I know that New York State is still under that mandate. Um, do you have an opinion one way
Yeah.
or
One
another
thing
as an educator?
First thing about No Child Left Behind is that it was a very ambitious plan that was meant to be able to um, bring all of U.S. schools up to code and standards so that way we could compete with our neighbors around the world. However, No Child Left Behind is fraught with peril for several reasons. Number one, it is not fully funded. So you're holding states and school districts to a standard that you're not fully funding. And the federal government has a great way of doing this. They say to you, we are going to tell you that you need to do this, and then they're not going to pay you for it. It's the equivalent of me saying to you, you need to drive a Cadillac. I'm mandate that you drive a Cadillac, and that payment's going to be $1,000 a month. But yet you only have $500 a month. But I'm telling you that you're going to drive that Cadillac and spend $1,000 a month, and I'm telling you that you need to do it. But I'm not going to fully fund it for you. And we've done that. The federal government has done that with IDEA. Every year, people go to D.C. and the IDEA is for special education, individual disabilities, to make sure that they are, get all the standards that they need. But it's been chronically underfunded. And the same thing with No Child Left Behind. The other thing with No Child Left Behind is that there's this list. So if you have a few people that are not doing well, you have to close down the school. And that's very disruptive for children and kids, particularly in the urban area. Now, the reason why they put this thing out here where they're going to allow people to be able to opt out of this No Child Left Behind system, because now it's affecting areas where it hasn't affected before. So when it was just an urban issue, when it was only affecting urban issues, nobody really paid attention to it. They said we're going to keep it. But now we have some of the most affluent school districts across the country that are saying, hey, wait a minute, you're naming our schools as persistently, chronically failing in high-income areas that we're always doing well. So now people are seeing the foresight, and this is why they're saying, oh, you can opt out of it and try to do your own thing, but still have these standards. So No Child Left Behind turned out to be an ambitious program, but it turned out to be an absolute cardinal mess that has been underfunded and has handcuffed school districts and created more problems for many people and school districts across the state. So it does need to be revised. It needs to be mended, maybe not ended, because I am definitely for standards.
Okay.
There's no question that we need to have high standards in this country. I was raised with high standards. I think that our students need high standards. I think our teachers need to make sure that they hold kids to high standards, because one of the reasons why we are where we are in urban school districts is because we don't have the standards for kids that were there maybe when you were growing up and when my parents were coming up. Those standards have dissipated, and we're paying and reaping the problem. We are in a state of emergency because of lowered expectations. So we need those high expectations, but we also need the flexibility to be able to say, hey, if we need a civics class, we need to have a civics class. If we need a class on manners, we need to have a class on manners, because all of those things affect math, science, and social studies. And until we can understand that, we'll continue to debate this same issue and have these same conversations 20 years from now.
Well, you just answered my next question. As a matter of fact, I wanted to segue more into that. Because to me, I think that what you just said was right on course. I think that part of the problems that we're seeing today is that many mothers and fathers are relatively young parents that have kids in high school. I mean, I'm finding out that the average age is between 38, 35 years of age with a child in high school. And when we peel this back, we're finding out their parents, many of them are uneducated or lack education, and therefore they're not really pushing their kids towards an education. And therefore now what we're having is a tremendous breakdown from parent, society, community. coming into the classroom. And because all of this is being dumped inside the classroom, one would imagine or one would think, oh, this is totally about education. These kids are failing, but the underlying factors of why they're failing in these classrooms. And I believe that those were some of the things that you just mentioned.
We have to peel back the onion and not think that any of this is simplistic, as you just said. The problem that we have in education and in society in general is that everyone thinks that everything is simple because we become such a society where when someone is sick, we can give them a pill and they're healed. So we seem to think that there are silver bullets in education, so we try all these crazy flavor of the months. So, you know, a kid is cold, so we give everybody coats. But we need to, and that's important, we need to give kids coats, but we need to look at the larger issues that we face, and one of the things that you said is so important. We have a serious problem when we have a child that's 16, their mother's 32, and their grandmother is then 16 years older. And we have a cycle that we have to break in this community. And we have a cycle that we have to break in this community to say to all people that education is your passport to the future, and the future belongs to those who have it. El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz, Malcolm X said that. This is someone who was a high school dropout and spent time in prison, but yet he understood the importance of education. But we have now come to the point where we don't speak that to our young people, and we need to be able to, and we need to see how we break up this cycle, because it's a three-legged stool that we have in this community. It has to be family, community, and school. Neither one of them can function without the other two, and the problem is that almost all of those stools are weak, and as a result, the kids that are sitting out of schools are falling and breaking their backs and falling through the cracks. So we have to strengthen those schools, particularly the family. And if it's as soon as a mother that we can identify and we know, or a father, and we know that they are not, as we say, ready to be able to be parents. I mean, nobody's really ready to be parents because there's no handbook. But if we know that they have not graduated from high school themselves, if they have not had a good experience with the school system, that they don't have the job or the skills to be able to care for that child, we know that it is much more likely that child is going to have a difficult time growing up. And if we know that's going to happen, we know the statistics, we don't need to tell them over and over again. We need to intervene from the moment that child is born. As soon as that child takes its first breath, we need to put as many resources around that mother and that child to make sure that they're going to be seen through the finish line. And that means telling that mother that, hey, listen, you need to make sure you read to your child. You need to make sure you sing to your child. Oh, and by the way, as soon as that child turns 3 years old, you need to make sure that you enroll them in pre-K, because the payoff on that is exponential. You're less likely to go to prison. You're more likely to graduate from high school if you just put your child in pre-K. Oh, and by the way, you're putting your child in daycare. These are the types of daycares that you need to make sure you're putting in there so that way their brains are being developed and they're ready when they get to school. But what we're doing is we're playing, I always call it playing catch up without the mustard. We're playing catch up when a child gets in 10th and 11th grade, and then we're trying to fix them. Then that's triage. That's too late. That's too late. It's easier if we start investing in our young people early. And I'm talking from the moment they take their first breath, because that's going to save money. And if you're a conservative and you don't think we should do stuff for people, you can put it in terms of prison. It costs less money to educate a child than it does to lock them up and throw away the key. So the choices are very stark for our future, and we have to start early in doing this, because a child doesn't come to the schoolhouse when they're 1 year old. They come to the schoolhouse when they're 5, 4, or 5. If we're lucky, they come when they're 3. And those first couple of years of what happens outside of the classroom has a tremendous effect of what's going to happen to them when they go into the school.
Yeah, but that is, when we actually look at this, I mean, this is a tremendous responsibility for a community to survive. I wanted to ask you, if there were no politics involved and if money was not a concern, I asked this same question to the superintendent. If you didn't have to worry about politics or money and you had this wish list, what would your idea of a school district look like? What would be your idea of?
My idea is if money was no object,
And politics
were out, and I didn't have to deal with the state and anything else, and people running for office and all this stuff, we would have a series of residential schools, period.
When you say residential
and when I say residential schools, I mean a child living on a campus, going to school 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And this would be for kids who may be doing well, but this would also be for kids who may come from homes where their parents love them and care them, but they just don't know how.
Exactly.
And there are a lot of parents who just don't know how. It doesn't mean that they're bad people. It doesn't mean that they don't care about their kids. It just means that they may have come from environments themselves where they didn't have that love, support, and understanding that I had when I was growing up. And because of that, we need to be able to put supports around these kids to make sure that we can see them through. They could see their parents on weekends. They could go back into the community maybe on weekends. But 24/7, there will be someone there making sure that they are getting an education. And after education, they will be learning manners. They will be learning financial literacy. They will be learning sports. They will be learning arts and crafts. They will be learning all the ancillary things that are also very important to building a well-rounded individual. They will be learning how to speak publicly. They will be interacting with lots of other people. This will be a very expensive enterprise. But it's what we need to do. We have residential schools and we have these schools, but they're usually for the well-heeled and people that are wealthy, and you may get scholarships here and there. But we need 2 or 3 strong residential schools in our community where young people will be able to, and I'd love to even run one of them if I could.
Before you go any further, I'm right on board with you with that. The only difference that you're calling them residential schools, I was just calling them urban boarding schools.
Right, exactly,
Okay?
right.
And the other thing that the other caveat that I would add on to that, because the parent would be losing their child to this facility, and they may experience a financial burden. So what I wanted to do, so this parent would not lose anything financially, to be able to bring them into the center or into
Exactly.
this, and either they would be a cook or
They would be a
something.
cook. The parent would be a volunteer.
Exactly.
But also, what we would do is the parent would be obligated.
Yes.
Obligated, because you know what? They had that child. The child is still their responsibility.
Exactly.
And they're turning over that child to individuals in hopes that they will be able to do well. You are exactly right. That parent would have to. They would have no choice but to be obligated to either cook, clean, be a part. But that parent, if they're not educated, they would be required to enroll in a Saturday school or a job placement program where they would be educated. That parent would be forced to get a general equivalency diploma, and then they would have to be enrolled in some type of trade, and it would be incumbent upon the school working with the county and other agencies to place that parent in a job, so that way they can also become self-sufficient and able to do well.
What would it take? What kind of initiative would it take? I mean, is that
It's so-
besides the financial part of it, but what would it? Because now I'm also looking at it. I've suggested this to people, and one of the first things that people say to me is, how do we get around the legal
Right.
logistics of getting the child to get in there?
Oh, yeah.
Because if the parent doesn't want the
Right,
child in
exactly.
there, and if this child is connected to a welfare check, then you know the parent isn't going to allow that. But if we can find a way where the parent can still keep the check,
Right.
but still bring perhaps both of them into
Right.
this facility. So how far away are we from being able to do something like that, and how feasible is
I think
that?
we're really far away, but you would have to
Okay.
expand programs like Wilson Commencement Park,
Okay.
which sole goals to move people from dependency to work. So you would have maybe them in context, and they'd have to be expanded to work with and other organizations to work with a family like that, families like that, and then also get the state to agree to let us have this residential school. You'd have to work with the county, because the county is responsible for delivering social services, to see what they would do. I think that it could happen if we just had the will to do it. And then we would need some people. And there, one of the things we learned about America from this last election, they spent almost $3 billion on this last election that we just had. So the money's in these United States of America. We would need individuals who believe in education and the future of this country to put up some money. And it would have to be a public-private partnership. It just could not be a public partnership, because the public would go broke. And we know what happens when money goes. You start cutting programs and slicing. So these places would have to be endowed, and would have to be strong public partnerships that are going to run, and you would have to have good leadership of individuals that are going to run these places, that aren't going to tolerate nonsense, and are going to bring in a community to help run this. But our kids are crying out for this.
Exactly.
You talk to any young man or any young woman, and I say young man because I'm a young man and I grew up through the system, and I was lucky to have a family where education. Listen,
Exactly, I know.
all my father had to do, what my mother had to do, was look at me. And if they didn't, there were other people in the community that was look at me. And your last name was Evans, so there was a standard that was set. But these other young people, they want that too, and they deserve that too, because there's a saying that no one asked to be born, but it's a blessing that we're all here. And why those folks are here, we need to make sure, because you know what, we could be losing the person that's going to cure cancer, cure AIDS, invent a rocket ship that's going to take us to Mars in 30 seconds. These people are here, and if they just get that education, and they just get that opportunity, we could change things. We could change things in this community. And there's enough smart people here where we should not be, as a country, so far behind where we are, and even more pronounced in the urban areas. It's a state of emergency, and it demands a radical approach in order to address it.
I'm probably now going to get run out of town for asking this question, and this is pertaining to teachers. One of the things that I've heard in different conversations, because teachers that teach in the city of Rochester are not necessarily mandated to live in Rochester or even have their kids
True.
into the district. And there is this conversation that if teachers were mandated to live in the city as well as their kids being mandated to go to school here, that in itself would lend itself to greater participation from the teachers. I'm not so sure if that would make a teacher better or not, and I don't want to think because a teacher doesn't live in the city of Rochester or has a child in the city of Rochester that they would perform less. But is that something that you've heard, or is this a concern?
Well, we have, one of the things that, first off, any residency policies has to be passed by the state. And the state has been very resistant to passing any of those things. I mean, there have been some school districts that have had it and it's met with mixed success. Well, one of the things that we're trying to do is we came up with a residency policy. We're working on a residency policy, actually, where we say that if a teacher lives in the city or in that area, that we can give them some types of incentives. Because right now, the only people who are really required to live in the city that work for the city or the city school district are high-level administrators. Not even high-level administrators. In the school district, the only person that's required to live in the city is the superintendent. No one else has to.
Okay.
In the city of Rochester, the mayor and his cabinet, police chief, fire chief, they have to live in the city. But one of the things that we can try to do is try to cultivate people to try to get them to live there. Because there is something to be said, whether or not you believe a teacher should be required to live in the city or not, but there is something to be said that if you are required to do that product, that you're more likely to be invested in it. Mm-hmm. So if you work at a particular restaurant and you're the owner of that restaurant and you don't ever eat there, people may say, well, what are you doing? And I think that would definitely strengthen our school system.
Yes.
Because guess what? A child is going to behave a little different. I remember there was a principal once that worked at a school, and she lives right down the street from the school. The school is transformed and totally different because they see her on the weekends at our house, and they just know that there's that connection that is built. So the question is, how do we foster and build those types of things in order to be able to do that? Some of the things that you can do is, you offer incentives on housing, and we're trying some of these things. And those are important because it is important, I think, for a teacher to be connected to the community, whether or not they live there or not. And if they're not, we have to find programs and relevant training to make sure that they're able to relate with the student body that they're working with.
How connected do you believe the teachers have to be? Off camera, I was mentioning to you about how I'm working with a school in Miami, and they thought to address the problem of young men wearing their pants down was to go out and buy a bunch of belts. I mean,
Right.
I personally found that to be demeaning.
Right.
Because, I mean, you're trying to say that these guys, the reason why they're walking around is because they don't have belts. I mean,
No.
there's a much bigger
issue there
than that. And that's part of what I wanted to ask here. Are teachers more inclined, I guess maybe culturally, residentially, to know the conditions of the students that are coming into their classrooms?
I think many are not.
Okay.
Some are not. But it's important that they be.
Okay.
Because, for example, most people would know, like I know, I've seen people using your example. I've seen young people with their pants down off their butt, and guess what? They have a belt.
Yes.
So the issue is not the belt. The issue is the mentality and the culture and what they're seeing. Mm-hmm. And that is what needs to be addressed. So instead of going out and buying belts, what they should do is bring in someone from the prison system to talk to those kids about what the implications are for them and why the history of why those pants are being pulled down. Or have a conversation by showing videos of where these kids got that from. They saw some rapper or somebody who they thought was cool with their pants hanging down. Or you want to have a business person come in and give those kids a conversation about what that means for the workplace, where if they're coming for a job from me and they're coming to be interviewed, if they have their pants half down, I'm not going to take them seriously. So, and then just the respect out of women. No woman or man or anyone wants to see their underwear, particularly if they're not clean. So I think that you're exactly right. That again, I think that we look for these silver bullets in education and just in general. That if we buy a bunch of belts for kids and or coats or other things, that's just going to solve the issue. And that I think that puts off having the more difficult conversations as it relates to what we need to do in order to improve as a people, what we need to do in order to improve as a nation, as a city, as a community. We put those conversations off by coming up with flavor of the month type things that we think are going to be silver bullets and solve our problems. But all that does is sweep the problem under the rug, and then it never gets addressed.
And that is the same thing what we do when it comes to addressing the community. I know that there are people that when they hear this portion of the show, that they're going to probably turn off or become upset because um, they're thinking that we're pointing the finger at them. We're not pointing the finger at the community, but what we're asking is that the community become involved because this can't be done without the community involvement. I mean, no matter what the schools do,
Exactly right.
okay, the school can, unless we have this residential
Right.
school
Right.
where they're there 24/7, prior to that, I mean, there's only so much that the school can do. And when this child is no longer participating in school activities, the community's got to do something because we, as a community, we are letting students just fall through the cracks.
Right.
There are a lot of people there are a lot of students that I believe that could be saved. One of the fortunate things about when I was growing up, we had that sense of community. We had Mrs. Moxley. I mean, she was everyone's
Right.
mother.
Right.
We had Mrs. Ham. They're the ones who actually started the Ralph Bunche scholarships way back in the day. So we've always had people in the community. It's just that our focus, our shift has become different. And in the case of people my age, many of them now feel that they don't have to do anything.
Right. Right.
And I personally feel that that's the worst thought.
It's the dangerous thought. Because you know what? Anytime you get too comfortable, it's very dangerous. Because I always tell people, I said, listen, I said, I'm a college graduate. I did well. I said, I could go off into the sunset and not have to worry about anyone else. But my ancestors would be turning in their graves. Because you know, I always tell people that one of the songs my parents used to play for me all the time. The Children of Selma. I play it for my son now. Someone died for me. They didn't know my name. Someone marched for me. They didn't know my name. So we have an obligation to those that have come before us, that paved the way for us to be there to improve this situation that we are. And if we are not concerned about it because we're so comfortable in our own skin, or because we think that we're too old now and we've done everything that we can do, shame on us. We cannot stop because the future generation depends on this. The future generation depends upon this larger community. And you're right. There is no pointing the finger. It can't, it's not just the teachers. It's just not the school board. It's just not the parents. It's just not the community people. It's all of us collectively. And we all have a role to play in this. There's some stuff that the school district does that is stupid, a mess, and doesn't make any sense. But there's some stuff that parents do that are absolutely crazy. And there's stuff that the larger community does that is absolutely crazy. The key thing is for all of us to be slow to take offense. Yeah. We need to be slow to take offense and not think that because someone says something and speaks truth to something that they're automatically blaming someone. No one is interested in blaming anyone. You're exactly right. What we want to do is fix it. And in order to fix it, it's going to take that three-legged stool of parents, community, and the school. And part of that community and part of that parents is also the students. Everyone needs to be able to come together and say, it's going to be a residential school. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to roll up our sleeves and do it. But it needs to be understand that there's not just a silver bullet. There may be one of many things in the pie that we need to do in order to solve this problem.
How do we, now I'm asking the question, and I mean, you may not be able to give me the answer, and this isn't necessarily for you, but this is a question for the broader community. And how do we get kids to come back to the realization that education represents freedom? During slavery, one could have been killed.
That's right.
If they learned how to read.
Ask Frederick Douglass.
Okay. We know that from slavery, Brown versus the Board of Education, Jim Crow, the equal but separate, that whole thing that we've gone through from an education point of view. But yet, when we look at history, all of the black people or minorities or anyone that has truly succeeded, who has come from oppressed conditions, succeeded because of education. And here today, we are in an environment where young people look at education as if this is leprosy.
Right.
They see no value in this whatsoever. And I don't know how that got flipped around to be so.
We have to make education cool.
Yes.
We used to always say that education is always in fashion. You know, we tried that, and we tried to, you know, we would try to have a fashion show as it relates to education, to have people, you know, strut their stuff and try to get education cool. I used to say that education should be as cool as MTV or BET. But unfortunately, I think that a lot of it is societal, where education is, you're called, if, for example, if you're a well-spoken African-American male that goes to the all-boys school, Leadership Academy for young men, you're called white because you speak correctly, you dress well, and you're able to articulate your point. Where have we gone in our society where that is now acceptable? We need to flip that on its head, and we need some of these people who have a lot of considerable influence over our kids. Particularly, this is why I'm a big fan of hip hop and education. This program that they have in New York City that I want to try to bring to Rochester, is because we need people who have a lot of these influence over these kids to speak up and tell them the importance of education. For these people that are rappers or singers or entertainers to be able to say, but yeah, I'm a rapper, singer, entertainer, but behind me is this person that's responsible for saying the contracts that I get and all these other things, and I have to be able to read to understand that contract. So we need to encourage reading. We need to encourage these things, and we have to speak them every single chance that we get. And unfortunately, we've gone completely the other way. All you have to do is read a kid's Facebook post and you say, oh my God, where did they get this from? Where did they get this from?
Exactly.
And the problem is that we have lowered our standards in our community. We can no longer do that. We have to speak truth to power, and we have to make sure that our kids understand their history. I think our people should perish because of a lack of knowledge. And I think that lack of knowledge is the lack of history. And if you read any book written in the 20th century or 19th century, it always warns us that we perish because of a lack of knowledge. And any young person that does not know what Brown versus the Board of Education was about, that doesn't know what Plessy versus Ferguson was about, that didn't know what the Civil War was about, that didn't know what all these people that marched and died so that way you could go to a school that has a smart board, we're doing a disservice to those people. And we have to send that message to them, but it can't be done in a way where we're preaching to them.
Yes.
Nobody wants to be preached to. So we have to find ways to meet them where they are and then try to get them to see the benefits of that great education.
And what does that look like? How far away are you from being able to bring in people that could influence?
I think that we've done it on a certain level. You know,
Okay.
we bring speakers in, we bring these things in, but I think it needs to be cohesive and it needs to be broader. We should have speaker series. I always tell people I want speaker series every month. And then we find a carrot to get the young people to get there so they can hear these things, because mentors and influence on people are the key. I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for other people.
Of course.
So we got to pair these kids with other people, and we do that a little bit, but not enough, that can help them see themselves. And I always, you know, when I was less busier before I got on the board, I always mentored young men, and I did that because I wanted them to see themselves in me, just like how I saw myself in other people. And I think once our young men and women be able to see that, they'll behave totally different because they know that there are people who came from where they came from, sometimes in even worse situations. Because none of our kids got sprayed with water hoses. None of our kids got bit by dogs. None of our kids were denied the opportunity to go into a school. They didn't have to drink at different water fountains. They didn't get shot at when they tried to go to the voting booth. So sometimes I think because of that lost appreciation of history, we've taken things for granted, and as a result, it's reflected in the behavior that we see, and how it's manifests itself is in the low expectations and the low numbers that we see in the city school district and urban districts around the country. And that is something we have to fix.
Just to reflect off of what, as you were mentioning that, it made me reflect. Here in today's world and golf, we're seeing Tiger Woods and the opportunity of a black person playing golf and succeeding.
Right.
I can remember within my lifetime, right here in Rochester, being a kid, going over to Genesee Valley Park in the 60s, wanting to be a caddy, and they denied me simply because of the color of my skin.
There you go. There you go. And this is, and we're not too far away from that.
Exactly.
And what young people need to understand is that the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act just passed in 1964 and 1965. That's not that long ago.
And the reality is that these young people, although they miss that part, they think that they are past that part. And it brings me to the quote that Angela Davis said, if they come for me in the morning, they're going to come for you that night.
That's right.
So it's just them. And then we see that manifesting itself in the dropout rates and the things that we are experiencing here in Rochester. Is this just indicative of Rochester? Is this a country problem?
This is a country problem. This is a country problem. You can go to Detroit, Baltimore, Chicago. Look at Chicago. More killings in Chicago than in Afghanistan and Iraq in 1 year. This is a country problem. We have a problem in the city. And this is why one of the things I said, that one of my hopes for the president is that he would have an urban agenda. And I don't mean that just at the expense of everybody else, but there has to be an urban agenda in this country to start addressing some of these major issues that we have in our cities, and we're going to continue to see them. And this has manifested itself in all of the major cities. We know that if a child is not reading by grade level at third grade, then they're likely to drop out. So we needed to put all of our resources into these early childhood education to make sure that a child is reading at grade level, and if they're not, to get them up to that to par to be reading at grade level. We also know that they're more likely to drop out, and if they're more likely to drop out, they're more likely to end up in prison. Prisons are big business here, and we know that in the disproportionate amount of individuals in prison are African American men. That doesn't bode well for our society. That doesn't bode well for our community as we go up. I mean, who will my son and my nieces and nephews, who will they be able to connect with and interact with if their peers are being sent away or killed? Now, I don't say that to say that all folks are bad, because we got some good folks that are doing good things and on the right, and the vast majority of our kids are good kids. But with the numbers that we have to good, better, best, never let it rest. We cannot stop. If kids are good, we got to get them better, and then we got to make them the best. But the problem is that many of our kids are not even at that good level yet, and that's my fault. That's everyone's fault. We can't stop taking our foot off the gas and focusing on it, and we can't get. I think we become too complacent and too comfortable because of the progress that we've made. We forgot about the struggles that got us to that progress, and as a result, a lot of times we're sitting around like bumps on the log, and it's frustrating. And I think that we also rely on the school system or the government to do things that we must do for ourselves as a community.
Absolutely, without question. I noticed that Rochester School District has a very unique position that many cities and many other states don't have, and that's a director of African American Studies.
Right.
How did Rochester pull that off?
Yeah, we're one of the few in the country.
Exactly.
We're one of the few in the country. The board made it a priority.
Okay.
We made it a priority that the majority of our students are African Americans, and that it's important for them to have a sense of history, and that type of program is still bumps in the log, but it's there, bumps in the road. But that type of thing needs to be infused throughout the curriculum. It needs to be infused throughout the district.
And how much does this director, does she have any teeth? Can she really direct some? Because I agree with you. I believe that the vast problem that we're seeing with young people is they don't know their history. What helped turn my life around is once I began to understand that we were more than just about picking cotton, that we've done some great things, and not just here in America. When we look back to Africa, we see that we come from
The great ancient African empires.
Exactly.
Ghana, Mali, and Sangha. You can look at the great African empires. I am who I am today because I had a sense of history from the beginning.
Okay.
And I knew that I had an obligation to carry on and do well and be the best. So this person, their job is to infuse this throughout the district, to get in there and infuse this concept throughout the district, that it be more than just classes and other things, but it be an understanding of the African American issues that confront, and also to let people understand that these are issues that other ethnic groups also have, and that if we solve a lot of those issues, it will also solve a lot of the other issues that we have, because the only way that we'll move our graduation rate is by, number one, improving graduation among special education, which are only African American males, and increasing our African American male graduation rate.
Exactly.
So it's a state of emergency and something that needed a lot of attention, and this was not a silver bullet, as I keep saying, but one of many tools that we wanted to have in the toolbox in order to help solve this problem.
And once again, would you really get this community to understand that we are truly under a state of emergency, and perhaps maybe because I'm just coming back and they're saying, well, we don't know who he is. He's been gone too long.
Right.
So if I say that, they may say that, what does he know? But because you're the board, the president of the board, can you let this community really see that we are truly under siege?
I think the community needs to understand that. I mean, all you need to do is look at your neighborhood, and all you need to do is look at the prison population and how many young men are downtown in the Monroe County Correctional Facility, or have dropped out, or have gone elsewhere, and that is an issue. That is an issue that needs to be addressed and needs immediate attention from every single level. It needs to be all hands on deck. And it needs to be on hands on deck from the President of the United States to Mrs. Smith on Smith Street. Everybody needs to be tuned into this issue and working to solve it. As I said before, third grade, if they're not reading on grade level by third grade, it's a problem. We got to make sure that every single child, we have to make sure that every single child is reading on grade level by third grade, and that we're focusing on this child as soon as they take that first yawn, that first breath. Otherwise, we're going to be paying the price for it for years and years to come. And this is an issue that should bring conservatives, Democrats, Republicans, liberals all together, because do we want to bear the burden? No. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to. We don't have to. There's always going to be issues. I'm not someone that thinks it's going to be perfect, but the numbers need to improve. The numbers need to improve. We have to improve these numbers.
And just on the other side of that coin, for the people that may not understand what will happen if these numbers don't improve.
Well, I think that if the numbers don't improve, you will continue to see more prison population. You'll continue to see more babies having babies, and you will continue to see people who are not able to be economically self-sufficient, and it will put a burden on the rest of society to be able to pay for the services that the individuals need, because we have to take care of our own in our community, and if you don't, you see what happens. It's an investment. An investment in education is one of the most important investments we can make. I never balk about the money that we spend in education. Some people say, oh, we spend a lot of money. Yes, we do. But it is one of the most important investments that we can make. Because you know what? I would rather spend it on the front end than the back end any day. And if you want to spend it on prisons or you want to spend it on education, right now we're spending just about as much on housing somebody in prison than we are in education. And when all we would have had to do was make sure they were reading on grade level. And think about if we would have had that residential school. We could have taken that child to put them somewhere else. Some of the most brilliant people I've talked to and have heard from are people that have gone to prison. And you think you were talking to someone with a PhD. But because that stuff, or someone, you read something that someone wrote, and it's because they were in the cemetery. I don't know. I know a lot of people in this community are tired of seeing our young black men killed, and tired of going. I told people, I'm so tired of going to funerals and reading an obituary about this type of stuff. It has to end. And our young people have to know that there's another option. That option is education.
I would like for you to speak to this community as well about how this isn't just your problem. I mean,
right. Well,
that you're not responsible for this. Okay, although, yes, you are the board, the president of the board, and you do have a responsibility to try to make all this right, but you didn't make this wrong.
No, well,
okay.
I always tell people this has been going on for 30 years, and 30 years ago I was 2 years old.
Okay.
So there's a song that says we didn't start the fire, it was already burning. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you Malik Evans definitely didn't start the fire. I walked into a mess. And the issue is how we're going to fix this mess. And you don't fix it just by relying on the school board.
Exactly.
or the school system.
Mm-hmm.
No parent should expect the school system to do everything for them that they must do for themselves. We were raised being told, don't expect others to do what you must do for yourself. The school system can't wake your child up and put them in the shower and then force them to go to school. What the school system better do, though, is to make sure your child is being educated. And you your job is to be holding that school system accountable. Your job is to be calling me and bugging me every single day to say, I don't like this curriculum. What are you doing with this? What are we doing with that? That is the parent's job. And the community's job is to make sure that we are providing the resources to make sure that this type of stuff can be able to be happening. And that's a role that we all have to play. But there is not one single individual that's responsible for solving all the issues. Now, the superintendent has things that he needs to do, right? We want to make sure that there's lunch every day, that the buses are there on time, that we have books. Those are things that the school system needs to make sure that they do. But in terms of teaching our kids to care about themselves, to have pride, to care about the future, that's all of our jobs. And if we're not doing that, we're shooting ourselves in the foot and we're handcuffing the future of our nation.
Do you have any programs that address that teaches empowerment, that teaches social skills? Do you have?
I think there are some, and they're scattered throughout the community. I think there are a lot of nonprofit organizations that do a lot of good work. Hillside Work Scholarship does work. Center for Youth has programs. We have Quad A for Kids. I can go on and on of the multitude of programs. But the problem is that we could spend there's not enough programs, unfortunately, to absorb all of those 30,000 kids that are doing those things. So we have to think broadly about continuing to add more tools to the toolbox in order to solve these issues.
Okay. I really appreciate you taking the time to come in here and really laying this stuff down on the line for us. I believe that the community needs this kind of conversation. I think that they need this heart-to-heart talk. I think that this community needs to hear members of the community, and especially outstanding members of this community, to be talking to us, letting us know, because we voted you
That's right.
into this position. So we're looking at you as a leader. And from time to time, we need to hear you talk to us as a leader. I came across the quote, "Leaders lead from the front."
That's right. That's right.
And I thank you so much for coming in so much.
And I'll keep leading from the front.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is James Young. I look forward to seeing you next week. Be blessed, and remember, it's a new day.